I want you to say a few words before we dive into the questions.
Yeah, I don't know what to say because every time I hear that story, it just makes me so emotional, and I'm so sorry because, he's my only son. And I knew he did things very differently from the time he was born. Like he said, he was bridge. And I always say that, he doesn't do it the normal way. He will always do things differently. So even after the accident, he never gave up hope. So every time something, he was challenged with, he made sure that together we managed it the best we can. So my job became very easier because he did not go down with the challenges and the barriers that was created after his accident. So he always wanted to achieve the best. So as a mother, I was always there for him to achieve whatever he wanted to. Mm-hmm. I never pushed him towards anything. I always gave him free rein. I always made sure that he did what he enjoyed the most.
Could I ask you to, his narration of the story is, very powerful, but the key ingredient is that consistency of that act of kindness and then being around his side. Could you talk about a bit of your journey, when or how did you inculcate that and where it came from, that being that strong person beside him?
I think I gave all credit to my mom.
So mom to mom.
Making me that strong. Because I still remember after the accident, it was like the second week, she came rushing from Sri Lanka. And she came and she went to his bedside, she dropped her suitcase, then she had a big cry with him. And then, so that was it. So then when we were going home, when I started crying, she's like, "What are you crying for now?" And she said, "If you go down with it, who's going to be there for him?" And she actually yelled at me. So I'm like, "Mom." So I think it was good at the time. Otherwise, I will never realize, if I had, to date, I have never gone down that path, even revisited what's happened to us, because even in any time in my life I go down that path is when he talks about that. And that's why I become very teary, because I realize I have now a job to do. I need to be beside him. And it's not about me, it's all about him.
Lovely. And also he talked about that we moved forward every time a challenge came, from one situation to the other one, and you moved forward. And our theme today is March Forward, and very, very much aligned with what you talked about today. Could you elaborate more on what's going in your mind? What self-talk you're doing? I would want to learn. What are you telling yourself in those moments of challenges and hardships you are telling yourself to move forward?
I think we set sails, right? And any direction that takes us, because we can't swim against the current. So the best way to do is to just go with the flow, mm-hmm. and make the best out of it. And I lost my job, and my employer gave me an ultimatum. He said, "You either look after your son or come back to work." So it was easy for me. I know as a mother, I would choose Dinesh anytime. So I gave my job, and I realized that later in life we could actually reset our sails and get back into life twice as strong. So I always believed in that.
Mm-hmm. When you were talking about what your mom said in a statement about that you have to keep on doing things and keep on believing in yourself, in all those moments whether you are getting into a law degree and going back to finish your medical studies, what it meant for you in more of a regular reminder of what you have to do longer term?
Yeah, I think I heard this thing, I think I can draw a parallel to illustrate what Mum does for me. and I was listening to this talk with Kobe Bryant. He was one of the greatest basketball players of all time, right? And he was talking about how when he started out, he was actually really bad, and he lost this tournament. He didn't make one shot, but he went home, and his dad just said, "It's all right. No matter what happens to you out there, I'm always here for you, and I believe in you." And Kobe said that it gave him the safety to fail. And I think that's what Mum has always given me. She's given me that safety where I could go and try, where I could go and attempt things, but I always know I had the safety of my mum, or there's someone that always believed in me. There's someone who will never judge or never see me as a failure. So I think Mum has just given me that, what Kobe's dad gave him to go out and do what he needed to do. So, and she's always said, anything's possible. Like I flew a plane a couple of years ago for the first time again, and there are things that, working on spinal cord injury research, so we have a lab, we've got about $7 million of funding over the last couple of years. We're running a study on about 40 people we're hoping to recruit. And that's happening right now. So we're working on curing spinal cord injury. And my mum has always said, she's always made me believe that anything is possible. She's always there with the chicken curry at home if I need it.
Very powerful. In terms of your journey, could you talk about what were your own aspirations and personal purpose in your life, and how has the whole last 40 years of your life supported you to achieve your own purpose? And if you want to talk about your own purpose growing up
Because
as a young girl in Sri Lanka.
I had to start all over again a few times after I've grown up as well. Once when we migrated to Australia, I had to start all over again. And the second major milestone was when Dinesh's accident happened. I was at a point, I was working for the local government at the time, so I was pretty much set, and I thought, okay, I'll start traveling now. And then I had my long service leave coming up as well. In 2010, when Dinesh's accident happened, what I did was I took all that leave and I went to the hospital every day to see him. Mm-hmm. And then while he was at the medical school, we had no carers at the time because there was no NDIS at the time. So I was doing all that for him as well. So while I was sitting, waiting for him while he was doing his studies, I thought, why don't I do something as well? So that's when we also realized around that time there was no proper support for people with disability. When we got out of the hospital, we did not even know that there's a thing as an accessible car park because nobody told us. So I used to drive to the end of the car park and get Dinesh out on my own. They didn't tell us about funding, no nothing. So we struggled a lot. We sold everything. I lost my marriage and everybody walked away. So I lost my job. Lots of things happened. So I thought, okay, we're going to start all over again. When he went to medical school, I sat there and I started doing my master's in rehab counseling at the same time. So when Dinesh graduated as a doctor, the next year I completed my master's as a vocational rehab counselor. And
I would love you to talk more about the current work you're doing within the disability space yourself.
Yeah, so together, Dinesh and I, we actually reach out to a lot of people with disability that does not have a direction, whose hope is taken away, because that moment Dinesh explained when he was laying on a bed with a traction on, when I walked in and he was taken to the operating theater. But that words he said, "Mom, I'll be okay," he said when he saw me. And I trusted him, but I was taken to a separate room by some social workers and some doctors and said, Dinesh will never be the same again. He will not be even able to lift his hands up. They will fall back on his face. Prepare yourself for a long, hard journey. But I never believed in them. And lots of people coming out of the hospital after a acquired disability or a severe injury, traumatic injury, they all say their hope was taken away. Because they get told what they cannot do, they never tell them what they can do. So what I do is I always give them hope, and I always enable them to find their abilities and the strengths more than what people say that they cannot do. And he's an emergency doctor today, and he does so much work. He does night shifts, day shifts, and he comes and do speaking engagements. He travels, and he do naughty stuff still, but yeah, and jump off planes and this and that. And I'm like, Dinesh, stop it. Yeah, but I can't stop him because he knows his strengths, and I think it's partly my fault too.
Thank you for the encouragement. You talked about the role of women in your life in terms of people helping you, putting poems up in the room, your colleague who, that's the act of, such a humble act of giving out their own salary, saying that, I'm happy for him because we want my friend or my colleague to be a doctor. I want to share my salary as part of his. Could you talk about those women a bit more and then talk about why those acts of encouragement, support, and inspiration, and how you're using those acts in your life to further your work, and then what's your work in the sphere of women with disabilities or broad women?
My mum and my grandma have been really foundational in the way I've come to see women, I guess, and to understand women. And for me, mum's been so much about strength and perseverance and so many amazing things, right? And also unconditional love. I don't think there's anything like the love of a mother in this whole universe. But also the women that have played a part in my career and journey, they've made sacrifices for me. They've taken professional risks to enable me. They've taken personal risks. They've given me their time. For example, just persisting with me for hours and hours and hours, Jenny the nurse, to help me figure out how to cannulate someone. It was incredible, and that's a skill that I take away to this day. I got to write a book a couple of years ago, which it's getting turned into a TV series at the moment with the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. There's some discussions. Anyway, that book came to life because Jamila Rizvi, the author, she introduced me to her publishers, and she said, this is a book that needs to be written. So that's how I got to write that book. So there's been so many women that have made a massive impact on my life. But I've been actually saddened at the same time. And I'll give you one example just to illustrate why. When I was in my first year as a doctor, I figured out how to be really quick at stuff. I actually see 25% more patients than my colleagues on average. And that's just because I've learned to be more efficient with technology and other things. But often I work with some amazing doctors who are women. And so in my first year, I was working with another doctor who was a woman. And we were on the same team, doing the same job. We're doing internal medicine at the time. And I just observed some of the challenges that she had doing her job. And it was that other staff often would call us and they wouldn't believe that she's a doctor and they'd prefer to speak to me. There were some patients that were quite sexist in their approach. There were other team members from my other colleagues as well. I remember one doing a procedure that the doctors normally don't do in our hospital. I was like, what are you doing? And she said, well, I don't have this done like the guys do. So I saw a lot of these barriers, and I thought, you know, I can't use my hands. I use a wheelchair, right? I have a disability. But for my colleagues, for some of these colleagues who are doctors and women, they had more challenges doing their job because they were women. And to me, that was shocking. Like that was a really confronting thing to see. So it's been a combination of all these things, you know, and then you see the women with disability who face more domestic violence disproportionately and challenges. We've seen people, I worked with the Disability Royal Commission and particularly had to focus on cultural and linguistic diversity. And again, we saw women being disproportionately affected. So I had all these amazing women in my life that have made it possible for me to be who I am. I've still seen all these confronting things that made me realize, just like they stood for me, I want to be a part of that conversation where I can.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a good, lovely question here. What's your experience working as someone with a disability, and how can we better support women with disabilities in workplaces?
When I was coming back to medical school, I remember talking to this pediatrician. And the pediatrician said, I don't think the patients will take you seriously. So eventually I started work, and 9 years later now, I've seen thousands of patients, right? Thousands. I'm actually shocked myself that not one of them has ever said, can I have another doctor? Can you do your job? I don't know if they thought it in the back of their mind, but every single one of the patients have been amazing. So I think the community's there. I think the community has progressed a lot more than we give them credit for. Actually, thinking of the pediatrician, the kids are hilarious. They push my wheelchair around, they play, they climb up all over me, and I steal the icy balls in the kids' ED in return. But it's actually the institutions that are the most challenging.
Mm-hmm.
The organizations, the structures, that bureaucracy. It's really, really difficult to navigate. Certain parts of the hospital, certain parts of Queensland Health, they were difficult to navigate. But what's made it actually possible are the people on the ground that have helped me troubleshoot, that helped me at the start. And like my friend who offered up a part of the salary, because you can't argue with that, right? Because she's like, I'm going to take money off the table for you right now. So make a decision. But it takes guts. It takes a bit of courage. It takes a bit of bravery. But you just got to give one person that shot. Just one. I'm not saying we need to make big, sweeping changes everywhere. I mean, all that helps. But if every single one of us in this room just paved the way for one other, made it possible for one person, gave an opportunity to one, then I think we make an impact. So my advice is just start with one.
Lovely. Thanks, Dinesh. Chithrani, I want to come back on the same, your observation of, when you work with women with disabilities and what the challenges you see, and then what kind of trends you're observing, and how are they more challenged, and broadly, your observation in the health system.
Yeah, because I work in the disability employment space as a vocational rehab counselor, and as it is, men with disability find it very difficult to find employment, and also women are equally challenged and even more challenged because they think that they are really not good enough, and they also feel that people are not going to have any faith in them either. So I think a lot of women are challenged because they see them as the weakest link in many of those organizations. And sometimes women reach out to me and say, can I please speak with Dinesh, because I've been discriminated and I've been told this and that. And even the woman who's approaching me does not have faith in me. They ask me, can I reach out to Dinesh through you? So, yeah, I think the opportunities are also not that many for women with disability, and I think together we can make a huge positive difference by encouraging them and also advocating for them.
Thank you. There's a question from Slido. Has the most likes, so I have to ask that question. This person says, as a woman of non-Caucasian ethnicity and an immigrant, what are the biggest challenges you face as a woman in Australia, even to this day, 30 years after immigrating to Australia?
I am so happy to say that I was never discriminated and I never felt any different in Australia. As soon as we moved to Australia, I got a job at the Macquarie University in Sydney. So then 6 months later, my husband, he's a civil engineer, so he got a job in the Byron Shire Council. So when we moved with him, I was also able to find employment there. Wherever I went, employment-wise and opportunity-wise, I was never discriminated or I never felt any as an outsider. I think the main reason for us to feel that way is we made an effort to learn the culture, integrate into the system, and embrace that culture and what the Australian way, I think.
And I think if I might add something to that,
Please.
we had the opportunity to do that because of what Byron Bay was. Yeah. So to give that a bit of context, Byron Bay was a very welcoming place. It was there were so many different people, everyone got along, and we were really accepted. I remember meeting a friend of mine randomly when I was going for a wander on the street, and this guy comes up to me and he's like, "Oh man, do you remember me? We went to school together." And it's like, no, in my head, but I was like, yes, of course, maybe. So anyway, I did remember him in the end, and we grabbed a coffee, and we were just talking about Byron Bay. And he said, "Oh, well, you know, my family, we're Aboriginal, so," and I said, "Wow, I never knew that. You know, this like 20 years later, and I never knew that." And he's like, "Well, come to think of it, I didn't really understand or realize or thought that you were a new migrant at the time when you came to the school." And what we reflected on is that Byron Bay, as a community, no one really cared much for any of that. They saw us as people, and we always just saw each other as human beings. I mean, there were extremely rich families that sent their kids to school with us. There were people who were living on welfare, but no one cared. We just played together. And I think a bit of that context of what Mum was saying is that we had the good luck of living in a town like that as well, which just accepted everyone and treated everyone the same.
Lovely. There's a lovely question here. How do you encourage more men to be attending these kind of forums? And I understand we are minority here, men, today, but we can understand how it feels in some boardrooms and in some spaces. But how do we encourage more men to be part of these conversations, these celebrations, and in these settings?
I think Dinesh will be the best person to answer that, because I remember once he was saying, like, he was supposed to be speaking at another Women's Day, right? And some of his male friends had asked, "What are you doing talking about women, talking on a Women's Day event?"
Yeah, I did have a friend. He's one of my closest friends, actually. He's Catholic, and I've lost count of how many kids he's had. Every time I talk to him, he's like, "My wife's pregnant again." I'm like, "Man, wasn't she pregnant recently?" So he used to be really cool. He used to go snowboarding with me and all this stuff, and now he drives a van and with numerous kids. So I always give him a hard time. But yeah, I remember telling him, he's like, "What are you doing today?" And I said, "I'm going to this Women's Day event." And he's like, why? Why are you going to that? And what do you? And I think we all have to be a part of this conversation, right? Because we all need to be allies. We all need to move this together. And I think maybe sometimes it's just about inviting one other person, maybe one male, having them come along. I don't know how comfortable most guys feel attending events like this as well. Like some might just feel uncomfortable, I don't know. But we got to create that atmosphere where we can make people feel welcome to be a part of the conversation and to be sponsors and to be allies. And I've learned the importance of that so much, because in medicine, the people that have enabled me haven't been people with disability, right? They've been people without, and a lot of them have been women. So I just think we've just got to invite people along. We've got to maybe just invite one at a time. And if we can just start to fill it bit by bit by bit, then I think it becomes everyone's conversation, which it needs to be. I think we don't need to speak in an echo chamber most of the time, right? Like I even think that about politics. Like we have people on one end of the spectrum speaking to that end of the spectrum, and we have people on the other end of the spectrum speaking to that end of the spectrum. But actually what we need is everyone talking to each other and talking to people that you normally wouldn't. And that's how we find a middle ground and how we find change. So I think it is important.
I want Chithrani to talk about the idea of hope and I think it's for my personal advice for me, if I'm raising a 6-year-old daughter, and what are the things I should be raising a girl who has strong leadership, a girl who can does more acts of kindness and observe and be more empathetic. What are your advice?
Yeah, I think mostly live by example is the best way to go. And ever since Dinesh was small, he saw, like he said before, I never lost faith in him. I showed him love. I gave him good advice. And I always told him anything is possible. And I did not limit him to what he can do and what he cannot do. Sometimes he made mistakes. He made bad mistakes. That's why I had to go to Roma Street and pick him up from the police station. But even though I think the best thing that's happened was he learned through his mistakes. Unless we make mistakes, we can't learn because we don't know the consequences. Unless something bad happens to you, you really don't know. Unless you fall into a deeper well or something, a pit or something, you don't know how to come out of it. Yeah, I always tell people, there are two choices in life. You can just accept your fate and stay there, or just move forward.
Thank you. I want you both to give concluding remarks or thoughts on, again, the theme of March Forward before we conclude this discussion.
I think for me, I was scared of hardship. I used to avoid hardship. I loved comfort. Me and my mum, we were wandering through the medical school recently, and there's a table there that I always used to study at every day. I was there studying, and I can't control my body temperature anymore. It's a part of the spinal cord injury, so when it gets cold, I get really cold, and we carry around hot packs and a heater. When it gets hot, I can get really hot sometimes. But the cold is torture. It's really hard. And we were wandering past this table, and I remembered in winter when I was studying, I used to have this hoodie or a blanket, and I looked like a homeless guy there. And I used to drink hot water to keep warm, and I was shivering sometimes. And it was hard. It was so hard. But I just wanted to eke out that little bit more before I went home. And I kind of missed that. I missed the hardship because there was something pure about that. And at the end of it, we had this moment where I graduated and we celebrated that. So I've come to love hardship. I think life is, it's not about waiting for the rain to pass. It's about dancing in the rain. It's about embracing the hardship. And as hard as our journey has been, I think we were on the flight here yesterday, just looking outside, and the world is beautiful, the life is beautiful. Me and my mum get to hang out and do cool things, and we have a good life. So sometimes the obstacle is the way, and I think we just got to get into a time where we embrace hardship, we fight through it, and we learn how to dance in the rain.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Chithrani, do you mind having your closing remarks on the idea of March Forward?
I think together we can make a positive difference. If we help each other out, marching forward would be a very easy task for each and every one of us.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Chithrani. Everybody, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Dev, and thank you, of course, to Dr. Palipana and Chithrani Palipana.
Thank you.
So much food for thought there, isn't it? This is one of those days that brings with it so many mixed emotions, very complex discussions with many, many layers.